deliver this keynote address on a very important conference, deliberating on a very important theme of solidarity economy models, mutual aid, and cooperatives. I have been primarily a professor in management, and most of my time I spent in Indian Institute of Management, Cooperatives, and was working very closely with cooperatives, basically looking at how do you look at the scalability and economic development of it. We discussed in the morning session how the solidarity economy is actually emerging as a key alternative to the perils of what is happening in the world. So I will make a brief presentation on some of the thoughts and some of the activities which we have done, specifically in the context of the cooperative development. I'll speak more on the cooperative development, but many of the challenges which the cooperatives face are actually similar. Challenges are there for other forms of solidarity economy models, be it self-help groups, be it the other mutual aid organizations. So from an economic point of view, from a macroeconomic point of view, the type of challenges which we face when you look at the growth is something which I will look at in the next 30 to 35 minutes, and then we will open up for the questions. So let me share my screen. Hope it is visible to you. So I will primarily look at this aspect of economic empowerment and growth through cooperatives. And we know that specifically at this point of time when we are speaking about on this conference, we are very happy news that the World Cooperative Economy Monitor, which most of you know that is a key publication by International Cooperative Alliance to look at the health of cooperative economy across the world, has actually ranked one of the cooperatives, first time from Kerala, as the world's #2 in the industry and utility space. From the country, earlier we had Amul, the Gujarat Milk Marketing Cooperative Federation, as well as IFCO, which has been looked at as similar positions in the agriculture space. But it's a matter of great pride that a cooperative, a labor cooperative from a very small village in Kerala could actually get into the top global recognition. So I will speak about that also in this session, because I was fortunate to associate with this cooperative for almost last 15 years in a very close quarters to see how some of the key challenges which you face when you are looking at the growth of cooperatives is being addressed by them. And some of those are areas where we could do further on the research, which actually poses the problems and good areas of further development. So basically, the motivation and the context for this is that we have enough literature on how the resilience of cooperatives and mutual aid institutions work when you are faced with disruptions. Not speaking about the pandemic which we are facing today, which is also being now discussed, but even the financial crisis which we faced globally during 2008 and even before that, how some of the cooperatives and cooperative institutions and the nations which depend substantially on cooperative movement is actually being able to come out of that. It's been very well documented. But there's an interesting paradox there, and that's something which I will discuss a little bit more detail. In fact, I would like to discuss two specific large, according to me, as paradoxes which need to be looked at from a researcher's point of view to work on further. The second thing is we also look at, leading from that, we look at some cooperatives as a key vehicle for economic empowerment. And when you are looking at mutual aid organizations globally, we see that while they do a great job in addressing the immediate challenges, the subsistence requirement, the growth portion of it is actually missing as a whole. I mean, there are exceptions. You have Seva, which could be a great exception. Kudumbashree to some extent is an exception. But if you see globally, when you look at the data, and I'll share some of the data with you as I proceed, you see that they basically look at subsistence as a key element. And the key economic activity or an economic institution there is miles to go. And there could be challenges to that. And specifically when you look at the non-farm cooperatives, and I put it in the bracket because with some of the changes in the laws which is happening in this country, even the farm cooperatives are also going to have the similar problem which currently the non-farm cooperatives are facing. So maybe in the time of discussion, we can elaborate more on that. So from a sort of an action research point of view, from a point of view of a case study of one of the cooperatives, the cooperative which I mentioned some time back, which actually could grow from a very, very humble beginnings to one of the largest cooperative in the world, we can actually learn some of the cases from that, some of the learnings from that. That's forms my third theme of this session per se. So, so with that, let me get into the details which we were discussing. We actually spoke about cooperative sector and mutual aid sector as a very key element or third alternative, which is very true. If you look at today, the latest 2019 World Economy, Cooperative Economy Monitor speaks about close to 1 billion people have directly been involved in some activity with the cooperative. We have close to around 3 million cooperative, and like Dr. Christabel has rightly pointed out in her inaugural speech, you have almost 1/3 of them in India. You have of the 3 million, in fact, a little less than 3 million, you have 854,000 of cooperatives are from India. And you also have similar in other part of the Asia, and which gives close to around 10% of employed population is actually working in startups in this sector. Now, if you look at the wealth creation which has happened, we see that the 300 top cooperatives turnover exceeds around $2 trillion. And of course, you know that many of the cooperatives are very small size, and we are not looking at that. When we look at large cooperatives across the world, the top 300 actually looks at close to almost 2 trillion. And there's a wide variety of sectors in which they operate, and there's very strong resilience of them in the economic turmoil. And there's a very detailed study done by ILO in 2013, which actually looked at how cooperatives behaved and came out into the. I will not touch upon that in more detail now, but that's an interesting thing to look at for people who are working in this area. But what I am more interested to put into this august audience is that when you look at as an economic institution, it's important that we need to compare with comparable economic institutions. This is basically where the challenge. When you have 300 top cooperatives contributing to $2 trillion, you have 5 corporate entities which contribute almost similar amount as far as turnover is concerned. You see this, the world has a challenge, a very, very skewed way of the wealth creation as well as wealth distribution which is happening. You see that market, if you look at market capitalization, which is a general measure, which is a capitalist economy measures, if you look at one company called Apple, have got a market capitalization close to 2 trillion, which we spoke about in the context of the turnover of the wealth given to the total cooperative members. Now, so this is an area of concern, and this is an area of concern where to minimize the Gini index across the world. It's important that these cooperative institutions have to be strengthened further. They actually have to enhance their outcome. They have to actually start looking at how do they actually really compete and grow into the economy, in the economy per se. So that's a point which I will park here. I will come back to this. So it's equally important for us to look at as solidarity economy institutions, what's the role they play today, and how do they actually, their economic performance translate into the social performance. And this is something which we will be looking at in close quarters. Now, to do this, we actually start to look at data. Many times the studies in cooperatives are actually happening at a micro level. Now, you look at a smaller location, you start looking at very close studies on that. We look at how that impact the local problems, which is very, very important, because at the end, this is actually a decentralized mode of development and a decentralized mode of intervention, which will be looked at. But at the same time, we need to also look at the macro pictures and the best data which we have. And as we know that one of the big challenge of the cooperative and similar thing is that the availability of relevant data or reliable data on that. But one of the detailed study has done in 2013-14, the global census, the first time the cooperative census have been done by United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. And they actually looked at a very detailed study of across the world on the cooperative movement. And they identified almost 54 factors which lead to what they call as a social progress index. And some of them, they can be clubbed into basic human needs, foundations of well-being, the opportunity which is available for the people, which are typically, we know that the measures of the progress of a society. Now, if you look at, we have the social progress tier. When you look at, we have very high in some part of the world, high in other part of the world, and things like that. But along with this, they also looked at the participation of people in cooperative movement, in this sort of social action. So primarily, they looked at what percentage of members, population is actually having a membership in a coop. What percentage of population is actually employed in a cooperative? What is the annual gross revenue of a corporation as far as population is concerned? So some of these are economic measures which are looked at parallelly with the social measures as such. Now, I'm sure that we, as most of you, are working in the cooperative area. It is natural. We believe that the developing nation should have a larger significant measure in this cooperative economy index. But unfortunately, the results were very, very different. If you look at the social progress index, which we call as SPI, you see that many of the European countries and some of the Oceania countries actually have larger social progress index, which is sort of not surprising because we know that social welfare states have got that index, have a very strong linkage, a correlation with this high SPI. And you see that if you look at the ranking of countries with respect to cooperative economy index, which basically, as I said, the three factors which we mentioned earlier, the participation of the population in cooperatives, the employment which is being generated by the cooperatives, and the third aspect, which is basically what is a value add to the GDP, which is the cooperative sector is providing. You see that it's again very, very strong, interesting results to have. So this correlation between the social progress index and cooperative economy index forces us to think and motivate us to look at how do we actually enhance this aspect? Because if you really wanted this economy, these institutions have to come as a very strong third front. It is important that the cooperative economy index of our countries have to actually improve substantially. And the surprising thing is Asia or Asia is can you mute please? I think get some disturbance. So if you look at Asian countries, which actually have got a significant number of cooperatives, does not figure in this, which is very surprising because the spread of cooperatives across the population, even though some of the markets, especially let's look at the fertilizer market in the country. In India, for example, 36% of the share is with cooperatives. If you look at China, some of the specific areas in China, like cotton industry in China, 60% is with cooperatives. But leaving that sort of a thing, the widespread of cooperatives and solidarity institutions in developing countries, especially in some of these countries, are still not to the extent it is possible. So we need to ask this question, why is this not happening? In fact, that is a question which I think we need to on to the other thing. Because keep something, please send us keep the mic off, otherwise yeah. So now let's go further on this to understand this more. So if you look at the regional representation of this to me is a paradox. You don't have another reliable data as on today. So you have, while in Europe, it's almost excess of 45%. So a large number of, where are these cooperatives working on? You see sectoral share of cooperatives in the globe. If you see that when you look at the sectoral share, here also some interesting things happen. While agriculture and allied sectors is around 50% in number, the revenue from them is only 13%. So the sectors which are having larger revenue scope, larger economic wealth generation is still being dominated by so-called corporate entities. And I think that is an area which need to be seriously looked at. In fact, I think in the inaugural address, Professor Gopinath has mentioned about the IT and the information technology field which he is working on. Now, if you look at the detail of the number of cooperatives which has happened in such sunrise sectors, which is also important because when you look at an overall inclusive growth, you require that, and I'll come back to that in I'll come back to that in a little more detail because as a person who works in digital economy, I'm very concerned about the huge economic divide which is happening in this space, and unfortunately, this has still not been a major topic of discussion in economic circles because so in such context we primarily look at the role which can actually be played by the cooperatives instead of so-called corporate platforms, which is actually emerging as a big capitalistic institution in digital economy. So, but unfortunately, if you look at and a part of Europe, very soon. So there is this necessitates need for looking at cooperatives in the non-farm sector in a more serious manner. That is the first portion. The second portion is the one which I just mentioned, that the participation of youth in cooperatives, and especially people who are doing the digital economy jobs and relevance of cooperatives. Now, there was a detailed study on this, and I think one of the papers which has been published in 2013, there's a very interesting statement made which speaks about the detachment of youth from the cooperatives. And you see that there is and this is actually being taken very seriously at different levels. The ICA is actually doing a lot of activities to bring youth in, and the newer generation activities into the cooperative fold. And if you look at why this is a paradox, this is a paradox because if you look at the digital world is all about collaboration. Digital world is all about cooperativism, but the legal instrument is actually not happening. That is a challenge because if you look at what are those things of new enterprises, you have a substantial amount of volunteerism which is happening. You have a substantial amount of collaboration which is happening. Most of the products which we use today in the digital world, they actually came through collaboration. They actually come through models where people actually give their work on a free or a very low cost for the social benefit. Internet is a classic example. No, it has actually come out from the effort of people who are ready to share. So the sharing economy, it actually the self-help or crowd-funded model which we were speaking about is actually being a common thing in development of newer products and services. The substantial amount of value-based things which is happening over there. A very small, agile and technology-based. So there is a big shift happening in the way the organizational development is happening in the world from very, very big companies. It's happening in these companies per se. And if you look at this, compare with the principles of cooperation, which is primarily the credo in which cooperatives operate, you see that most of the principles of cooperation is actually being followed by the new age, the world and the technology companies per se. So there's a huge synergy in the principles of cooperation, principles of knowledge economy. So a person who works in this area, I was always puzzled by the fact that why, even though there is a synergy of principles of cooperation and principles of knowledge economy, why there's a very poor participation of cooperative sector in the knowledge economy industries. And why you have an Uber? Why don't we have a cooperative of drivers driving that? Why don't you have a cooperative actually have to have a platform so that you basically share the returns with these people itself? The basic principles of cooperatives can happen. So when in a digital world where 9 out of 10 platforms have been in two parts of the world, which is actually controlled by few companies, which are very huge companies, the need for the cooperatives coming into this sector is actually going to be a very important element. So there's a very low penetration of youth-led cooperatives in these sunrise industries. So and later we will see how the sunrise industries can actually marry with the subsistence level challenges to do that. So when you look at this cooperatives and new models of growth, which are the areas or vistas which we can actually look at, there is a move from profit models to value to impact models. But unfortunately, you still don't have the methodologies to get into that. The second thing is we also speak about subsistence, but along with subsistence, we need to have an exponential growth which is to be done. Because going back, if your social progress index has to go up, your cooperative economic index also have to go up. That sort of a causal relation you can establish. But there are challenges. The challenges is that the world has got different set of instruments for driving the corporates. You have equity, you have external equity, which may not be the possibility given the cooperative nature or given the solidarity nature. So how do we actually marry these two? So these are actually the puzzles for the strategies to drive that. So second challenge is that many times when you are looking at a solidarity economy, we actually look at short-term benefits, which is important because you are basically looking at people who may have to survive for today. And how do we actually take that and go into the long-term benefit? So how do I actually make sure that there is an investment which is possible? And these are some of the issues which we are grappling with. So to me, and that's something which I will discuss through the case study, is that how do we create value when long-term capital gain is actually a little bit of counterintuitive or counter to the principles of cooperatives? Because cooperatives basically look at it has to be for the members, and the members cease to exist. And at a particular, once they are moving out, and you cannot really sell your shares, just like what is happening in a corporate entity where accumulation of wealth, accumulation of gain is actually beneficial for you, because it can actually be going to a capital market and sell it, but that's not possible in the case of a cooperative. So why should, as a member, I should allow my earnings to be kept for a future growth? So this is a fundamental thing which actually limits many of these sort of institutions. That's basically the second point, that how do I ensure that the short-term returns are compromised for the long-term exponential growth? Now, these are very large and challenging problems, and we don't have one solution to this, but these are areas we need to start looking at when we are actually looking at expansion of cooperative into various sectors per se. So how do I do that? And we can actually look at the key principles of cooperativism. So as we know that there are 7 cooperative principles, and 3 principles can actually be adopted here. One is the autonomy and independence, which is something which actually makes these economic entities far different from the capitalistic entities. There's a concern for community, which is a very important element. And I think in the earlier session, Dr. Manju was mentioning about how the concern for community and the relevance for that is going to be a very important thing. And third thing is, it's important for us to understand that cooperatives are primarily for the member benefit. It's an economic activity. There is a social angle to it, but it's an economic activity. You are not really making a loss and doing it. You are an economic activity, and there is a member benefit which is required. So the members' life support, professional growth, and diversification can actually help these to grow into the big asset. Now, that is primarily the first part of my session. Now, let's see whether this is actually can happen in reality. So this looks only as a theory. So that is something which I will discuss in the next 10 minutes or 10 to 12 minutes, and then I will open up for questions. How do we implement this? Do we have a example of doing that? You have seen that Amul has done it, but it's a cooperative federation, and you also, as we know that agriculture and related fields have got a very different structural organization in this country, which actually allows a set of advantages and set of challenges. So since we don't have time to dwell deep into that, I'm not going into that. But when you look at the case of a Kerala-based startup, the ULCCS, some of you may be familiar with it, the Uralangal Labor Contract Cooperative Society, which is a labor contract cooperative society. The country has got around 46,000 labor contract societies today. And ULCS is considered to be the best and the largest among that. So it is a 96-year-old worker cooperative, and especially for those experts who are joining from other part of the world, it just grew from just a labor supplier to a specialist infrastructure developer. And key thing which I am interested to present to you is a way of diversification. Cooperatives in general don't diversify. There are examples of diversification. Mondragon is a classic example of diversification. But generally, cooperatives addresses a specific set of people, and then they started looking at their development to a large extent. But there was a need for diversification. I'll come to that later. The second thing is there's a membership base of from around 10,000, both direct and indirect laborers, and even being a labor contract society, they actually pay almost five times. This is little dated wages, which has been generally being earned by a comparative employee who is working in a corporate entity. So if you work with a normal builder, what you get almost five times that when you work with this. And it has today have an annual turnover of close to around 10 billion Indian rupees, or 90 million, which is actually growing, and growing at a 40% plus annum through diversification, innovative practices. And the target is $1 billion USD by 2022. Large number of national and international recognition has been obtained by this society, which came from a very small village in India. It's the world's second best cooperative industry and utility by the latest World Cooperative Monitor. UN has made this as a model cooperative in 2013. First primary cooperative anywhere in the world to be directly inducted as a member of ICA, and many other international awards. So what the important thing is that we need to understand how they did it. So the beginning of this started in a very small manner as a protest to a social stigma as a part of the Indian national movement. But very soon they require that the motivation for that is like any of the self-help groups and solidarity economy, we look at addressing the poverty and inclusive livelihood as the key element as such. And how do you do that? You look at the collective strength of the workforce, help in infrastructure building, the roads, bridges, both in the pre and post-independence era. But over the period, from just 14 people, it has gone to a 10,000 people entity. From a 300 rupee turnover, it has gone to a 1,000 crore turnover, and the growth has been phenomenal, especially in the post-globalized world. And that is something which is good, because many others are actually find that this is the other way around in many other contexts. This exciting story is actually happening through a case of diversification. The last 10 years, it actually grew almost 50 times. From a builder, just somebody who is a contractor, it became a builder, become a developer, and it became a facility manager. Just from a construction, it diversified into construction, information technology, and tourism. moved to agriculture, it moved to education. Wherever labor is required, wherever growth can be possible, it actually moved into that. Now, naturally, one have to ask, why do you need it? Why did you want to spread this? So that is basically what we will be discussing it. Some of these which I have done, I will not go into the details of this, but some of these are actually considered to be of very, very high quality and diversified thing as such. To understand why they did it, it's important to understand how India behaved in the post-1990s. We know that with the globalization coming in post-1990s, the huge change in the business landscape. The infrastructure grew. The human power is actually replaced by the machine power. You started using your roads, which is basically what this company was doing. It's actually being taken over by machines. So there's a big fundamental dilemma here. I'm a labor contract society. My job is to give work to the laborers. If I adopt machinery, my laborers' jobs comes down. So this sort of a contradictions always happen among this among the people-led enterprises. So when you look at diminishing share of worker return in the production, which is happening because of globalization, and there are data to support that. I'm sure that many of you may be looking at that, and there are changes in the business model which is happening. The other side, the worker aspirations are changing. Economic growth and change of objectives, they actually look at better working conditions. They also have very many alternative opportunities, and because of that, shrinking membership happen. And there is also general change in the worker composition happening. So how do a labor cooperative survive in such turbulent environment? And we have seen this in the other context also. You create a group for subsistence. After sometimes the members of the group grow up, so they actually move out and then created their own entities and go into the corporate world. So how do we actually remain rooted in the principles of solidarity economy? And that is an important element which we need to start looking at. There are challenges. Technology challenge, which means you need to adopt the technology and reskill the workers. There's a resource challenge. When you want to acquire the technology, you cannot have conventional means of finance which is available for a corporate entity is available to you. You need to retain the quality labor, which means you need to actually give larger payment, which is again a challenge. You also require funding. And when we looked at data, we found that the cost of finance of fuels is almost double that of public finance cost. And this is an issue which many times when you face as a problem when a cooperative entity actually grows up. The cost of financing for cooperative entities are many times much higher than what you can get from a market, which actually makes a competitive disadvantage. So the social challenge is also an important thing. How do an organization keeps its social focus of inclusion while remaining competitive in an open market? A big question, because as I said, many organizations which have started as cooperatives or self-help groups or support organizations, as they grow, they actually move from their original social focus of inclusion. And then they started looking at the classical, capitalistic institutions models. So how do we still maintain the social challenges? Other question between. How do you address these challenges? So we come out with they come out with a model which basically looks at how do we create the cross subsidies of the construction activities, how do you capitalize the new opportunities and address the challenges of supply manpower. And the model which has come out is that we need to actually go for diversification and expansion. As I said, huge challenges for diversification, because diversification requires your money today have to be kept for the future, which is counterintuitive and counterproductive. You also have competition, so you need to beat the competition. You are moving into areas where you are not really protected, and you require different type of resources. When new resources comes, how do you maintain the cooperative culture is an important thing. So we found three challenges: competition, resources, and people as a challenge. Addressing the competition, the only way you can address the competition is to do better than the competitor. You cannot actually drive an economic enterprises only by emotions. You cannot do only by the social capital. While social capital is an important element, you also show that your product have to be as good in a competitive market. So they basically adopted all modern techniques in construction of roads, bridges, buildings, LEED certified building, maybe a labor cooperative, but they actually make the best buildings. They make the best bridges. They make best thing. And the best part of it is this technology adoption has actually not reduced the jobs. It actually increased the jobs because your pie has actually increased much, much more. There are many iconic products have happened across the state, which has been built by them in this region. And to the other side is you need to also start looking at the new areas of new vistas of development. So IT being a new vistas of development. So creation of an IT organization as a cooperative, and that diversification has actually helped. So the first time anywhere in the country, a labor cooperative started a special economic zone, so that you are actually able to house the startups and IT companies, which are actually be a part of the future. Many verticals have been diversified. I'll not go into the detail for want of time. But the resource challenge, which is this looks too good that you are able to really grow fast, but there's a resource challenge.
There's no slides.
What is that?
There's no slides.
Oh, sorry.
We didn't have slides all along.
Oh my. Oh, sorry. I think in between it must have lost out. Sorry. Are you seeing that now? Oh my, sorry. I'm really sorry for that. Thanks for telling this. So I think you must have missed quite a few slides. Maybe we could take that when you are having a discussion. So two aspects which is basically for addressing this challenge of growth. One is the human resource challenge, other is the financial resource challenge. You see that human resource biggest challenge was that you need to have higher wages if you want to retain. You need to train and reskill if you want to improve, and new exciting opportunities have to be there if you wanted to make this more widespread and equal, inclusive. That's basically where the SEZ has been set up. Newer technology solution provider has been set up, and came to the newer areas like agro and other things. If you look at briefly, if you look at when we put this in briefly, you look at when I'm moving from a small contract to an infrastructure developer. Why am I doing that? Because I'm actually moving up in the value chain. When I move up in the value chain, my profitability increases, which means the share I can give to my members increases. I can retain them, I can retrain them. But when I move that, I require financial resources for asset creation. And as I said earlier, the challenge was that members who may not part with their wages because they want it for today. They are not going to do it for the future. And this is an issue which, if you look at literature, which has been discussed quite a bit. How you actually ensure that you are able to invest for the future. So the best way you can do here is that you actually started leveraging on your social capital, source fund from the public. If a bank can source fund, why can't a primary agriculture source? Primary society cannot do it. Second thing is you also have cooperatives have small wealth. Very rarely cooperatives cooperate with each other. So the IC also speaks about cooperation among the cooperatives. So a very clear consortia-based cooperative consortium. You know that when you look at large projects in the country or in the world, larger corporates cooperate, but cooperatives rarely cooperate with each other. So we look at the consortia funding approach for that. The management skills are the other challenge, which is how do I convert the variable cost into the fixed cost? So very different corporate management structure, but you are primarily looking at the basic cooperative principles have been adopted. The second change is that you are basically moving from an infrastructure business, which is basically your core strength, to very different diversified businesses. You require financial resources. So as I said, how do I convince them that, see, I'm a laborer, I'm primarily involved in road construction. How do I actually put money to develop an IT company or an agriculture company or a tourism company? So that is basically where there is a substantial amount of innovation happened. So you have a synergy of the core business with high potential businesses. Why do corporate entities diversify? Because they are minimizing the risk. The benefit of one actually spread to the other. So same model we actually followed here, and we actually looked at how do I support the member interest. So the concept of a family life value concept has been brought in. So a cooperative which says that you are a member, not only you continue to be a member of the society, but you are being productive, but your entire life you are actually being supported by the cooperative per se. So that actually helped a lot for people to support on that. The other challenge which we speak about in cooperative literature is the multiple owners, and because of that, there is no ownership. And there is a very key issue of free ridership happening because of this. And that is basically where there is a collective leadership model which has been brought in. We have written a very detailed work on that, which has actually been published in International Journal of Project Management, which actually looks at how the organizational culture can actually drive this collective leadership. And I believe that the key strength of solidarity economies is this concept of a culture and a trust. And if we can actually codify it, if we can actually make it into a scalable model, you actually be able to help in a large manner. And that's primarily what is being done in this context. There is a bottom-up approach of management that's actually been put in, which primarily go back to the point which I said in the principle of cooperative, the autonomy and independence. The autonomy and independence is not only at the cooperative level, but even at every member level. That actually helps. That is primarily the thing which has basically drove their projects. We used to find how you can improve the quality of projects in time and the thing. And we believe that when you combine the social benefit with economic features, you actually have a very interesting model, because a profit-oriented entity cannot command this social capital. But an entity which is looking at larger inclusiveness can actually command that social capital. That can actually create a culture and values in the organization. And, some principles of agile management has been looked. I will not discuss that detail. And these pictures which you see here is actually of a village which has been created exclusively for artisans. So you are primarily looking at high quality facilities, so that you are basically uplifting the people who are having a problem. The role of a cooperative in attaining the social development goal is for creating something for the larger good of the society. That actually reinforces you for the next level as such. So all this diversification to agriculture, education, all these are primarily meant as a means for doing that. What are those few learnings which we had? We found that if you really wanted a cooperative to grow and sustain, you require multiple fields together. You cannot have it one or two. You need to have a comprehensive model. And that comprehensive model involves you need to have benefit to the society, a key element of any of these solidarity economy institutions. You have a very strong participatory decision making. You need to provide a lifetime support for that. You need to actually look at esteem, empowerment, and trust being built into the organization, and a huge sense of ownership you build. And that is what today we call as the people-led enterprises. So converting institutions which have been created primarily to address weaknesses, vulnerabilities, to be turned into growth economic institutions, people-led economic institutions, is actually the way you need to actually move further on that. So each of these, the ULCS story actually tells us that how they have done on each of these. So when you look at from this, what we have learned is that the financial perspective, the capital mobilization, even though it looks difficult, there are avenues to do that within cooperative sector, along with multiple consortium of cooperatives, leveraging on the social capital. Market perspective is a very important thing, because market is not sympathetic just because you are a solidarity institution. Market always looks at from the product and quality perspective. So you need a competition and dynamism to be taken there. The human resource perspective, identification of the right talent with social perspective is important when you are going further. And governance and management perspective, understand the key DNA and develop governance principles to align multiple verticals. That's a very key thing about diversification. If you are not diversifying without keeping this key DNA intact, you will have a problem. And that's what happened with some of the other institutions. But the rule is that only if you grow big, you can actually do it. So the innovation and growth is very important for any social enterprise to go into the next level. Let me close by saying that when you're looking at the next wave of industrial growth, when newer enterprises are coming, you are going to see more and more social divide which is happening. And there are enough indications across the world on that. The inequality is increasing, which means the solidarity institutions, mutual support institutions are going to go in a big way. But what we have seen is that this is not inclusive in many parts of the world, especially in the developing world, compared to some of the other parts. So there is a need for a collective entrepreneurship from a defender model, which is what is happening today, to a leader model. And the ULCS is an example of that. How do you move from a defender, which they started as a defender, they are going to a leader model. Maybe example of Amul is also like that, from a defender to a leader model. And that is needed for almost all of them. But that, and this aligns extremely well with the digital world's theory of philosophy of small, agile, trust and voluntarism. But there are challenges to that. And those challenges are what I've briefly tried to explain. But they need deeper research into this. Because this is one case study. You need to have multiple case studies on this. You need to have actually start looking at how did an IFCO become so large? How did a CRIPCO become so large? How did an ULCS become so large? How did some of the others could not do that? You need to understand that in more depth and create a model, an alternate model of sustainable development. I'm sure that in this seminar, a conference, there are many interesting papers are going to get discussed from across the world, interesting stories, which will basically give us very interesting insight to this growth path as such. Thank you very much for a patient listening, and I will stop here and open for any questions. I think some chats are there. Let me stop and then take